I have new models for us to look at, and in this model we're going to talk about the planet Mars, and we're going to talk about where Mars connected to the Earth during the apocalypse. Much like Venus has the Artemis Chasm, and the Artemis Chasm has a site on Earth we call the rim of the Himalayan mountain chain, there is a surface affectation on Mars that matches a surface affectation on Earth. And in fact, when you begin to line it up, you see not just one, but several surface affectations that come together to express, a singular, what you might call crater. It's not a single crater. It's like the entire vent spread across the surface of the Earth and Mars. And so we're going to talk about that specifically. And as I began to work on this video, and I began thinking about, how do I express this? The only way to do this was to show you what I see here on a model, on a 3D globe. And the one notation when we begin here is that Mars is actually, although they're the same size here in the model, Mars is only about 80% of the size of the Earth. And that is a very important thing that we'll talk about in a moment as we talk about the evidence on the surface of the two planets. But what we're going to find is this. I want to talk about two things. The first one is here on Earth. You got Earth up here. Here on the planet Earth, I've only outlined what was, relevant to explaining here. So there aren't continents layered in, and there aren't oceans outlined. I just want to talk on a bare globe space that we're looking at this very specific, what I've termed here is a Y. And this Y exists for a very specific reason. It exists as part of a delta Y circuit that formed in the apocalypse. This is the Y, and you can see it in the diagram here. The diagram of the Y is a literal schematic. You actually set this up in the shape of a Y. And the surface of the Earth expresses the Y. Right here you can see it. The base of the Y here has a rim that we call the South Sandwich Islands. And so this node right here on this model represents that node on planet Earth. And you can then kind of envision where all the other continents are. So you've got South America then, is over here. Africa is over here. So this is the South Sandwich Island node. We call it the junction. This is a primary junction. What you then have is you have to the north here the Falkland Islands. And this distance between these 2 points can be measured. We know what it is, and it's just about 1,100 miles. And if you then create your Y, you can go 1,100 miles this way, and you begin to see how the Y structure occurred on the surface of the Earth. Now, we're doing that because we just want to identify where we're looking at on planet Earth and where those locations are. So we're looking at the South Sandwich Island junctions to a Y. If you have a Y, it means that you must have a delta as well. Delta and Y go together. And what I'm going to show you is that Mars represents the delta, the ground of the circuit. And I've said this in several videos. Prior to the apocalypse, these planets rested in a solar polar configuration. They were stacked north-south along a current called the Birkeland current. And what happened is that as Venus fell down from above, the Earth fell into Mars. That's what we're looking at when we look at this configuration. And where they came closest and connected, on Earth it formed a Y. And so on Mars we need to find a delta. And so that's what we have here at the equator of Mars. At the literal largest portion of Mars, across the widest segment of the planet, we have Olympus Mons, and then we have the 3 volcanoes, if you will. They're not volcanoes, but the 3 towers of the Tarsus Mons. And these two locations represent the conjunction point between the two planets electrically. And without arguing too much about what direction which planet was spinning, I'm going to point out that as I measured out earlier, the distance from Olympus Mons to the two corners of Tarsus Mons is just about 1,100 miles. It is almost exactly the same as the junction to Falkland Islands on Earth. They're probably, depending on how you measure it, identical. That's the point of it. And so what you have is you have these two structures representing a junction like this. They are quite literally face to face in a unified electrical junction like this. Now, what we get from this is some additional information to confirm it, because there are additional structures on Mars that have associated structures on Earth. And the most important one is found just to the north of the Olympus Mons structure, sort of in between, longitudinally between those two junctures of the delta. And this would sit directly adjacent, you ready for this? To the South Atlantic anomaly. And so these two junctures, the South Atlantic anomaly, which is right here on this globe, and this circular function found on Mars, I'll outline it on the diagram here for you, these two locations are synonymous. These represent the anode and the cathode affectations of the planet's position within an electrical circuit. Now, it gets even more incredible than that. If we take this example, right, where we have this alignment of Olympus Mons and the South Sandwich Islands on Earth and Mars, and we do kind of a broad alignment utilizing that at scale to a map of the Earth, we also see that there's another surface anomaly on Mars that matches directly over Australia, meaning that Australia represented in that moment the ground versus Mars, which was having an anodic expression. Where's the surface for this giant crater on Mars? And the answer is it helped cover the surface of Australia. Always ask, where did the rock come from? And so we discover that. But then we come to the question, what does the Valles Marineris represent? What does this giant chasm in the Earth represent? And as I just mentioned, the question we always have to ask is, where'd all the rock go? Where'd all the rock come from? In this case, as the delta Y connection expanded across the planet, it was in a much lower latitude on Earth, below the 45th. And on Mars, it was Valles Marineris is just below the equator, meaning that it is across one of the largest structure sections of the planet Mars. And because of that, the two carried a synonymous rotation across the entire distance. A very small amount of a chasm, I believe it's 1,800 miles across, on Mars, was pulled up in the delta Y configuration that formed the entire Atlantic Ocean. It was the southern expression of a discharge, and the material from Valles Marineris is likely what coats the floor of the South Pacific. The South Pacific expanded, and you have to cover that with something. You have to cover it with, material from another planet, if that's where it has to come from. And that, kind of makes sense because Andy Hall said this one day. He said it's like the surface, it's like the top of Mars was blown off. Not blown, sucked. It was discharged back to the Earth during the delta Y that stored the electrical energy over the forming of the Pacific. And so what we're looking here is we're looking at two scars that match across the distance and also match up with Australia. There are only so many ways you can explain these surface features. And anybody who argues that there were glaciers on Mars that formed any of this is insane. The surface features of Mars, like the surface features of the Earth, were formed in the apocalypse. They formed very predictable electrical structures on the surface of each of the planets. And like a puzzle, they fit together to give us a full picture of what everything looked like at the moment of creation. The creation of the solar system we see today. Nobody's catastrophism touches Dr. Stinky McDougal. Don't forget